It's now.
So, welcome everyone to today's webinar, the contribution of health promotion to democracy, fostering participation, equity and intersectoral action in local governments. I'm delighted to be one of your moderators today. My name is Katarzyna Brukało and I will be co-moderating this session together with Helena Kryżan. It's also worth to mention that together with Rosana Peiro Perez as the leaders of Work Package 6, so Healthy Living Environments, we are excited to guide you through this important discussion on how health promotion can strengthen democratic process at the local level. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers who will share their insights and experiences on this topic. Please note before we begin that there is no direct possibility to ask questions to the speakers during the webinar. However, if you have any questions, feel free to send them via mail. So info@preventncd.eu. It will be also shown by the last slide, and also Helena will repeat this information after our webinar. And we will make sure that they reach, so your questions, the appropriate speaker. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, so Professor Ilona Kickbush. She is founding director of the Global Health Program at the Geneva Graduate Institute, and she also directs Consortium of Digital Transformations for Health in Geneva. Professor Kickbush will present us the presentation and the title, The Integration of Health Diplomacy and Governments for Health as Strategies to Create Healthy, Sustainable living environments at the local level. So, Professor Kickbush, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here. And hello to everyone. My PowerPoints are just being put in place. And you can see here that I've adapted my title because as I was working on my preparations, I thought, this is a dimension that is important to take up today because, as you know, health promotion, the Ottawa Charter says health is created in everyday life, as is democracy. We sometimes forget that. And I'd like to adapt the word of somebody who once said, health is a verb, and to say both health and democracy are verbs, and they need to be actively practiced. But obviously both need supportive environments, one of the key principles of the Ottawa Charter, and I'll come back to some of those other principles as well. They need supportive environments that allow them to flourish. And so as I was preparing this, it became clear that there are new dimensions and new challenges at the local level for both health and democracy that we need to think about. And those are the transformations and the challenges I wanted to speak about, because technology has transformed both health and democracy and has given us both new opportunities, but also a whole range of new challenges. And as you know, we are also starting to discuss technology, the digital as a determinant of health. So if we look at this through the eyes of local governance, we can see that there are significant challenges and that these new technologies, in particularly the platforms, are shaping life at the local level in a way, in a very short period of time, that has become quite extraordinary and very impactful. And I think in terms of health, they have shaped in particular the whole issue of housing, of course, mobility, the way we communicate at the local level, the way we work, obviously, at home or somewhere else, and in so many different ways, health. And of course, a whole significant amount of platforms as intermediaries are connecting people and services and informations in many, many different ways. So they have changed the everyday life in cities. But they've also brought new challenges, while they've in some cases have made Why do I always keep getting this leopard? Okay, here, new challenges for local governance. And what you can see here is the effect that this change is having at the local level. And I wanted to raise this because one of the issues in democracy is participation, it is accountability, and it is the feeling that your government listens to you and provides infrastructure, provides services, etc. But through what is happening in a whole range of major cities and local entities is that people are actually feeling an erosion of local control. And this one can see particularly in the struggle to uh, moderate, to control certain platforms, for example, like Airbnb, many of which bypass local rules. And all of you will have experienced or at least read about the new social dynamics that come through that in neighborhoods. And we in health promotion need to be very, very aware of this, because if health is created in everyday life, if it's all about supportive environments, then we see that there are major regulation gaps here, and they also impact on the way people look at their city government, and of course impact significantly on determinants of health. And again, I'd like to highlight housing, which is becoming more and more unaffordable for people in many places. So what we can see is that a whole number of major gaps are actually being created. If we could go to the next slide. And these gaps relate to very central elements of democracy. On the one hand, transparency, and I'll come back to the data issue. Of course, the opportunity to participate. You know, initially we thought, well, social media is going to allow us all to participate. Well, it seems to have moved in another direction. And of course, accountability and the difficulty of policy enforcement. So a major thing that local governments are also confronted with is that actually these platforms create an enormous amount of local data on behavior of citizens, on consumption, on transport, what we buy, how we live. And all of these data, as we know, is highly health relevant. But who owns the data? The data are actually owned by the platforms, whereas cities could actually use these data to plan better and to provide better services. And so there must be a push also from the side of the citizens for data sovereignty, for data solidarity, something we have also been working on, and a governance of tech that is oriented towards the public interest and towards people. And in this context, what we have experienced, and of course the COVID pandemic was a major push in how it was lived out at the local level, that a significant amount of erosion of trust in government on how it acted or how it did not act was one of the consequences. And at present, also city governments need to re-establish this trust. And the role of mis and disinformation is very, very central. And of course, at local level, you have no control over the mis and disinformation that hits your local citizens through global platforms and mis and disinformation. And we are finding that democracies are being challenged. Indeed, they're being attacked very consciously through disinformation. Now, the interesting thing is that at the local level and in some cases nationally, a new movement has developed, which is called civic tech. And this civic tech movement is moving to really include citizens to be free, open source, and participatory for cities and for organizations. It was initially very strongly developed in in Taiwan. And I would urge everyone who's involved with city governance in many different forms to actually explore this civic tech reform and response in comparison, in particular, to the control by the large platforms. And I've mentioned some here. It's very active in Barcelona. There are examples around the world. And one of the key issues is also to make information accessible, participation accessible through digital commons and public Wi-Fi. So we need a new understanding of what is actually at the core of a city infrastructure. Also, cities should use, and if we think of health in all policies, the tech infrastructure that they build for intersectoral cooperation and make sure that they apply to ethical guidelines and strengthen the democratic accountability. And through this, what would be possible is, on the one hand, a better tracking, particularly of the social determinants of health, but also, as the next slide indicates, allow for a better tracking of equity and inclusion. So there are the general equity issues in cities related to income, disability, gender, race, etc. But of course, then they are combined, whether there is digital access and whether the digital divide is actually deepened if the city does not address that. But particularly here, cities can also open up avenues, and particularly for young people, for better digital and better health literacy. Also, there's a need to invest in local innovation and resilience. And of course, cities, because they are more manageable, in quotes, even though some of them are very large, if we go to the next slide. And we know from the Healthy Cities movement that there is so much more chance for health in all policy, for participation, for action on the social determinants at the local level, and to actually develop smart health applications with easier access to care, to information, to health services is absolutely critical and supports democracy. One of the recent studies that was presented in Bad Gastein last September from the European Observatory was that if people feel they do not get the health services from the city, from the government that they expect, that then they turn away from democratic representation to populist parties, for example. So this interface between democracy, health, digital is absolutely critical, and city governments and health promoters at the local level need to be very aware of it and need to move it forward. So stewardship, as the next slide shows, is absolutely critical. And I love this term that I found from this article, which is a term that we use more and more in health promotion, the term flourishing, linked to well-being and to well-being economies and well-being societies. But here, thinking about digital flourishing is absolutely critical. And cities can be stewards of ethical digital health approaches, which have more transparency and bring with it more participation, particularly for citizens to co-design solutions at the local level. And indeed, one can move forward with new approaches. So if we rethink our famous health promotion rainbow, which I've put up again on the next slide, you can see that people are starting to think in what way this rainbow needs to include digital dimensions. And I think for local action on health promotion, combined with the new digital environment, this is the way that we must go. WHO Europe has worked on some of these issues, trying to show how the digital determinants of health interact with other determinants, the social and the commercial determinants. And so I think local governance is a means for reclaiming digital space for public good and to ensure that this technology serves the community and not the other way around. And so I would say, as I've put up in this last slide, that a democratic digital health future starts at the local level, where health is created in everyday life, where real life happens, and where real governance happens. And I hope we can also move forward in this direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Lona, Professor Kickbush, for a very inspiring talk about the intersection of digital health and democracy at the local level, and about sharing this message at the end, which I found very powerful, that the local level is the real level, the level where people actually live, and where all the relevant really measures and policies for people's lives are being created. And this is the level that should also take ownership and start to really work and address these digital determinants of health that are very impactful of the health of people at the local level, but also of the democratic processes in local governance. So thank you very much for this inspiring talk. And coming up next is another distinguished speaker. I'm very pleased to announce Caroline Kostongs, the director of EuroHealthNet, who will be talking to us about how acting on the commercial determinants of health at local level can really serve as a cornerstone for democratic engagement. So as I said, Caroline is the director of EuroHealthNet, which is a very valuable European partnership for improving health equity and well-being. I'm sure most of you know about EuroHealthNet or are its members, because this is a partnership that brings together more than 80 organizations such as national public health institutes, universities, civil society organizations, and they do a lot of work on reducing health inequalities and advancing the area of health promotion in Europe. So we are very excited to hear you talk, Caroline, so please.
Yes, thanks a lot for this nice introduction. I hope you can see my screen. Can you see my screen now? I don't hear anything. Is it okay? Because
Yes.
okay, good. Thanks. Because I can't see anything, only my slides. So thanks a lot for the very nice introduction, and it's really an honor to speak after Ilona before Jenny. And I would actually like to start with a personal story. Some of you may have heard about this already, because it's sharing a story from my village and of McDonald's. And this happened last year, and I spoke about it last year, but I think it's very relevant for this webinar. So what happened? Well, in my village, McDonald's tried to settle before, in front of actually 2 schools and very close to 2 other schools. And together, they wanted to sort of reach about 4,000 young people. And of course, there was quite a lot of resistance against this in our community, in our village. And me, as a public health professional, you know, I didn't want this to happen in my village. So I joined the local action group of citizens. And at the same time, we had Cianzano, which is the Flemish Public Health Institute, and also partner of the Joint Action PreventNCDs, actually. They published research evidence of the link between obesity and overweight of children in school and the healthy or unhealthy school environments, and how increasingly school environments become unhealthy. And this was really useful and timely as well, because we use this evidence quite a lot in the action group of citizens. And I was quite surprised actually to see how such citizen group was effective in working together with the volunteers, in pooling talents of everyone. And we had quite an effective campaign with a petition where we gathered quite a lot of signatures. We filed many official objections to the municipality. We had a formal meeting with the mayor and councillors. And when McDonald's was initially accepted unfortunately by the council, we managed through crowdsourcing to get a lawyer on the case. And in the end, we won for the second time, actually, because McDonald's tried twice already, and we managed to keep them out. So it was a big topic in our village. Lots of people talked about it, and many people had different views. And I'm sure you are familiar yourself with these action groups of people that are standing up for their right to health and the right for space. Also, for example, the example that Ilona mentioned on Airbnb and the right to housing in Barcelona. This is another example I wanted to share with you, also from Belgium and the Netherlands, about a group of citizens trying to act against chemical industry that is emitting a lot of toxic PFAS. These are the forever chemicals, in the air, soil, and water. And every week on Saturday morning, they go to this chemical company with a bucket of soil, of polluted soil, to make the case for health. And they recently did that for the 150th time. So we as health promotion need to think, how can we capitalize in a way of these action groups, and how can we support citizens that are fighting for their health and for their environments, and also their democratic right for having a healthier society. We all know by now the Ottawa Charter. Of course, it's extremely valid still also for us at EuroHealthNet. We are taking the different elements at heart. But we also have to think, okay, how can we use this in our action against the commercial determinants of health? Because in 1986, when the Ottawa Charter was drawn up, the commercial determinants of health were not yet that visible, or not that on the agenda in the same way as it is now. So if you look at the definition done by Anne Gilmore 2 years ago, she defines the commercial determinants of health as the systems, practices, and pathways through which commercial actors drive health and equity. And what can we do here with citizens to act against these determinants? So in a way, health promotion, as we all know, it's about smoking cessation, supporting people to quit alcohol, about making the easier choice the healthier choice. It's about facilitating affordability and accessibility of healthy food, community participation, combat isolation, and so on. Many, many good goals and objectives to work with. But we have to step up and see how we can also consider the power of marketing and advertisements on those people that want to stop smoking or drinking alcohol. We have to push back against these health harmful industries that are polluting our environments. The ultra-processed foods, it's everywhere now. Fast food as well. What can we do to make sure that they don't overtake our environments and our food habits? And I think this is an important one. How can we engage citizens in system change, and how can we encourage them so that they dare to take on the battle against the commercial determinants of health? In a way, we are trying to get to boost social participation for systems change. I think social participation also has come up quite a bit recently, partly due to the WHO resolution on social participation of last year. And how can we use it for system change? And how can we also encourage systems leadership? And system leadership is something that is not leadership top down, but it is very much co-creating with people in the community. There are local leaders here everywhere. It can be the mayor, of course, but it can be police or teachers or religious leaders in the communities or active citizens. And identify those local leaders and work with them and those community action groups for system change. Because as we know, commercial terms of health is one of the root causes, and system change is about acting on the root causes that are often interconnected and not on the symptoms of this. Secondly, we also need to see what mechanisms are there to engage more systematically with citizens. And I wanted to highlight here the new Environment and Planning Act of the Netherlands that requires citizen participation and mandatory public consultation in large projects. And I recently read an article in the newspaper McDonald's that really is hindered by this new act in the Netherlands now, and it's creating a problem for them. If we talk about democratic engagement, we of course need to think of inclusiveness. So who do we want to bring on board and make sure that it is equitable and that everyone is being heard? Intensity, how intense is the cooperation? Is it a one-off meeting, or are there more structured ways to do this? And what is the influence that citizens have that authorities are prepared to give them? Is it just tokenistic, or are there decisions taken on board? And in this inclusiveness, I think we are now having a bit of an issue with populism. So what do we do? Do we only want to engage with those people that are thinking the same way, or do we also involve those that are think differently, or not, or disseminating actively fake news and not evidence-based? And I think this is another question that health promoters need to think of. How do we need to deal with polarization? This is, I stumbled upon a framework from Bart Brandsma, and it's a helpful thinking framework how we deal with polarization in public health. Because in public health, issues are political, because we often see a strong opposite views. In my village, there was a big push for people that say, oh, I want to have the freedom to eat hamburgers. This should not be a problem at all. We were being made a fool out of us. They ridiculed us on social media. So it's a lot of emotions and feelings is linked to this. And the media was talking about a hamburger war. So it was quite an issue within our community. And we all know from COVID and vaccinations that there are people that are very strong, feel very strong about public health topics. So this framework identifies 4 roles. One are the pushes. So the pushes for one side, and then we have pushes that have clear opposite views. Then we can identify the joiners. The joiners feels strongly also about this issue, but maybe less vocal, and they are, let's say, liking the Facebook posts of the pushers. But of course, the majority of people are very much in the middle. And we can call them the silent because they are, let's say, neutral or more nuanced, and that's not picked up by media. They are not really heard. And then there is another group that people like to be there. These are the bridge builders. This can indeed be the mayor or police. These are people that are standing above the 2 poles, above the the pushers and try to create understanding. So they go to the pushers and they try to explain and with counter arguments and make them see their views and try to bring them together and that way depolarize. But this is not the way forward, because by trying to build bridges, you fuel the pushers with further arguments. You give them the stage to continue to make their case, and often this is about emotions, and the pushers, are not interested in compromises. I mean, they feel very strongly. So rather than depolarizing, you are fueling the debate and risked for the polarization to be bigger. So the game changer is really what we need to do is to strengthen the middle. So provide leadership and to talk to people and to see what are their issues and generally listen to their concerns. People may want to be vaccinated. They are fine with vaccination, but they have concerns about vaccinations. And what are these concerns? People may want to eat meat, but they don't like the bio industry. So what are their concerns? What are people's dreams? What are people's fears? What are their dilemmas? And it's important to, let's say, listen what is in this big middle group and shape the narratives, and so strengthen the middle group. And I think that is an important role for health promotion, to strengthen this middle group. Of course, we need to have pushers, because pushers help advance society. And often we at public health, we are pushers. We need to be pushers in order to fight the commercial determinants and other views. But we have to be aware, and that's why I like this framework. It's a thinking framework. We have to strategically say, okay, now we are pushers, but now it may be better to strengthen the middle group and co-create and work with citizens. I'm almost there. This is almost my last slide. Just to say that as EuroHealthNet, we work at EU action at European level. And here we have pushers for competitiveness, for defense, for security. We have big delays on files regarding tobacco, alcohol, food. Also, if you want to address the fast food problem, we need zoning policies, and these are legal instruments to restrict fast food. But that cannot be done due to the EU Internal Market Services Directive. So we need action there. So at EU level, we have the same story. In EuroHealthNet, we are pushers. But at the same time, we also are working with the middle, and we are cautious, and we can see when it is best to strengthen the narrative of the large middle group. So my takeaways is, first, I think health promotion continues to play an essential role in community participation and democracy, and particularly in empowering people to stand up for their health rights and act against the commercial terms of health. Second, we do have a role, and we have to think this further through. How do we shape the narrative in the middle, listen, make them higher on the agenda, highlight the dilemmas generally, and find solutions also through democratic engagement? And third, how can we link communities at the local level? Because I'm often approached by other action groups, citizen action groups in other villages in Belgium, where McDonald's also want to settle. And we can do a lot with linking and sharing resources and working together at local, but also at national and international level, and work together on this one. I will leave it here, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this great presentation. I think one of the great takeaways for me from this presentation was that health promotion is really the one who is at the end connecting all of these dots. So working at both the local, national, and even international level to kind of get a big picture of everything, to encourage people to work together to preserve and improve health in local communities everywhere. And I think this was also a great key point on how the Ottawa Charter now lives in the 21st century. And it's also a great segue into our next presentation, which will be, I am very happy to announce, by Professor Jenny Popay. Professor Jenny Popay is a distinguished professor of sociology and public health at Lancaster University, and today she will be talking about community action for social and health justice. So she will be talking to us about how this can be a driver of democratic renewal in these interesting times that we currently live in. Professor Popay has worked as a teacher, as a policymaker, as a researcher in the UK, in East Africa, in New Zealand, and her research has always focused on designing and evaluating community action to address the structural determinants of health inequalities. You may also know her from her work with the World Health Organization or as her convener for the Global Social Exclusion Knowledge Network. She supported the Marmot Commission on the social determinants of health and has held a number of other public appointments, including serving on the Welsh Bevan Commission, advising the Minister of Health. She was the inaugural chair of the national charity, the People's Health Trust. But now, without further ado, Professor Popay, please share your thoughts with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I'm just trying to get these slides up. Is that now? Is that okay? Great, thanks, Helena. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I've had a great morning listening to those brilliant contributions from Ilona and Caroline. I think there are some echoes between what I want to say, but also just, I suppose to be clear, what I'm going to do is point to some of the challenges for health promotion if it is going to be a driver of democratic renewal, really, rather than tell you how it's doing that. So let me start by a bit of context, really. Three of the key issues that we've been talking about already, that I suppose I want to tell you what my position is on these. And the first is this notion of democracy, right? So the vision of this, of democracy, is that every voice counts, that we have governance systems, we have governments that serve both the present and future generations, and they're serving that to deliver equitable, sustainable prosperity for all. What's the current position? The current position is that we have mainly representative democracy, so government by the whole of a population, or more commonly by all eligible members of a nation state, and that is done through elected representatives. And the problem is actually that model of democracy is not working well, right? And partly it's because we don't have enthusiastic participation in our democratic systems. So in the US recently, only around a third of the population actually voted for the current president. Another round, just a little bit fewer, voted for the candidate that failed, and then around a third didn't vote at all. So that's part of the problem. But actually, much more profoundly, it's about our current system of democracy being very short-termist and a lot of self-interest in there. And this quote is from this really interesting guy, Roman Kazanarik. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Who's a public philosopher, and he says basically at the moment we have nations bickering, arguing about near-term interests around international tables, and we saw that with the climate, recent meetings on climate change. So in the meanwhile, population health and living conditions grow ever more unequal within countries, within regions of the world and across the globe. Planets burn or drown at the same time, and species are disappearing. So what is the solution? Is the solution democratic renewal? And I'm not going to answer this question, but I think there's a really quite profound question about democracy has changed, right, from the Greek democracy, where it really was the whole population, well, certain members of the population having a voice, a direct voice, through to the kind of 18th century beginnings of representative democracy. But is that what the next democratic revolution should look like? Do we need to rethink the model of democracy and not just think about this as increasing participation? I would leave that, you know, I think much of what Ilona and Caroline were saying is speaking to that, really, about what model of democracy we want in the future. So the second key concept here, I think, that we're talking about is health inequalities or health inequities. In the UK, we get very confused about these two words, so we use them interchangeably. And this is from the WHO Commission, that these inequities are systematic differences in health experience between social groups, social class, which we do tend to forget about these days, between gender, sexualities, race, ethnicity, ablement, disablement, and the intersections between those social groups or categories. And the fundamental causes are the conditions in which people live and work, the resources they have to live health-promoting lives, and the power they have to change things when it's not when they don't have those conditions and resources. And the key point, I think, from the Commission, which we tend not to talk about in this language, is that these fundamental inequities can be changed by policy action, and they're therefore unfair, and they are therefore a matter of social justice. And we need to talk about this as social justice, I think, more often. And then finally, health promotion. So, you know, previous speakers have already commented on the definitions, the process of enabling people to increase control over their health and its determinants, and thereby improve their health. It's a very individualistic notion, this, but then often the quotes will say it goes beyond individual behavior to change, to address health determinants, income, housing, food security, employment, quality working conditions. And then even further than that it generates multiple co-benefits, including strengthening democracy by empowering citizens with knowledge and shared decision-making power. So we're reinforcing participation, democratic principles, a sense of belonging, social cohesion. So that's the theory, right? And I just wonder, how do we get there, right? So here's my theory. My slides have stopped working. Okay. Of how this stuff works at a local level. Now, I'm talking here about health promotion initiatives at a local level. The majority of those that I am aware of in Europe and in other parts of the world are very local, in neighborhoods, working with communities that are bearing the brunt of social inequalities. What's the theory to the kind of health promotion work that goes on in those communities? Well, the first thing that people talk about is increasing social cohesion, social connectedness, by giving people genuine opportunities to participate together in activities, right? And then the theory is that that will enhance solidarity in these communities of place, could be communities of interests beyond place. And by doing that, it's nurturing the capabilities communities need to participate in decisions and actions that impact on their lives. That then, this solidarity leads to actions that can improve living and working conditions and health. And they do that by enabling communities to have collective control over decisions and actions that can change these conditions. I say this is the theory. It may not be explicit, but this is the theory of change that underpins the narrative about health promotion at a local level. And then finally, we have the bit that I think is most problematic, which is that this can then increase political understanding. By getting engaged in these actions that improve living and working conditions locally, it will increase people's understanding of the politics of health, the politics of social inequities, and that will increase civic engagement in democratic processes. And through that, you'll get increasing pressure for political systems that promote social, economic, environmental, and climate justice. So that's the theory. But the problem is that the evidence suggests that many community-based health promotion activities are a long way away from that theory, right? And I think there are two reasons for this if you look at the evidence. The first is that we generally fail to address inequities in the capacity that communities have to take the opportunity to have collective control. Now, there's absolutely no doubt from the literature, from the research that we've done, from people's experience of health promotion, that communities can have significant agencies in making decisions and in acting to change things. And I think both Ilona and Caroline have given some good examples of that. The issue is that agency, collective and individual, is shaped by capacity. And those communities that are bearing the brunt of social injustice have less capacity to take control over decisions and actions than more affluent communities. Because being disadvantaged, being poor, is hard work. It's hard work emotionally and it's hard work practically. So it's not that they don't have the inherent capacity to do this. They don't have the resources of time, and particularly time, I suppose, but also the energy, the emotional energy to get involved in these initiatives in a way that would really lead to collective control. And this guy, Ralph, concluded from reviewing a number of these initiatives in the UK that this means that place-based community health promotion initiatives may be regressive, imposing greater risks and greater responsibilities upon more disadvantaged communities in return for lower levels of power. So that's the first problem, that there are these really brilliant examples of community action that Caroline was talking about. Often health promotion is not involved with those at all. Caroline's arguing that we should try and partner with those initiatives. Meanwhile, too much of health promotion is failing to address this capacity inequity. And then the second problem is that these local initiatives neglect these fundamental drivers of inequity. They have what I refer to as an inward gaze, that they focus on the internal dynamics of communities. We talk about empowering people. We talk about building their resilience. Actually, we need to think about rather reducing the barriers to releasing this enormous power that they could have, to releasing their capacities. And we focus on proximal problems, on behaviors and lifestyles. These images that you can see on the slide here are taken from health promotion, public health documents, right? And you don't need to look very closely. You can see the images on the front covers of these documents is all about exercise. It's about walking. It's about riding your bike. It's about being active. And that bike is the ubiquitous image of health promotion. And that's one of my favorite ones. I mean, look at it. It's got an apple on the back. It's got the heart at the beginning. That one, actually, I've just found another one, which the handlebars are bananas and the seat is a pear. So this inward gaze on internal social relationships in people and on behaviors and lifestyles is a real problem for many health promotion local initiatives. So what's neglected here is this outward gaze, the outward gaze on the social and political changes that are required for greater equity. And that points to the limits of local action. And Caroline was saying at the end, really importantly, that the local absolutely needs to be connected to the regional, the national, and the international. And without that, it cannot address the levers that are really essential to driving greater equity and democratic accountability. And then the final problem with this neglect of fundamental drivers is that the experiential knowledge about the impact of social injustice that is held by people who bear that burden is often devalued or actually ignored. And, I think health promotion's notion that we give knowledge rather than we receive knowledge, we receive wisdom if we work with people who are living the experience of social injustice is part of the problem. And the other issue is that some community health promotion initiatives may actually be damaging people's health. So at best, they're having relatively little impact on inequity in health. And meanwhile, of course, social and economic inequities are growing. So we're not having any impact on reducing those. But actually, there's some risk that there might be iatrogenic impacts of health promotions local initiatives. And I want to give the example of this Communities in Control study, which colleagues and I conducted over a period of about 7 or 8 years, one of the longest evaluations of a community empowerment initiative. The initiative was called Big Local. And it was kind of an experiment in England in which 150 disadvantaged areas received £1 million each. Each area, the residents got £1 million plus a little bit extra to engage the population of these neighbourhoods to improve their neighbourhood. That was all they were asked to do, to plan and deliver action to improve their neighbourhoods. It took place from about 2012, 2024, just coming to an end now. And there was enormous flexibility in how the money could be spent. They could spend this in a very large chunk or in smaller amounts. They could spend it earlier or they could use the whole time period. The key thing was that the decisions must be collective, so that there was a partnership of residents that were responsible for governing this, for delivering it, but for engaging all the residents in these neighbourhoods in decisions about what should be done and how it should be done. And what we did was a longitudinal study involving quantitative data and qualitative data. And we did, on the quantitative side, we had some control neighbourhoods which didn't have Big Local. The key issue, these are headline findings I'm going to give you. But what you need to remember is whilst this Big Local was underway, it was a period of intense austerity in the UK, where public services were being decimated by expenditure cuts, and those cuts were largest in the most disadvantaged parts of the country. So we were not expecting to see positive benefits. We were looking at health and well-being outcomes, as well as outcomes on people's sense of control. So at the level of the Big Local populations as a whole, we compared some outcomes with these areas that didn't have Big Local. And it was a surprise to find that at that level, there was reduced anxiety and a reduction in burglaries and an increase in people reporting things in life were worthwhile. During this period of intense public expenditure cuts, the eligibility for welfare benefits was being cut, so poverty was increasing, and yet still in these Big Local populations, we saw a reduction in anxiety and in people feeling more positive about life. Mental health improved in the areas, in the Big Local areas that were implementing fastest, so they were spending their money faster. And that was greater where social activities were being prioritised. And the reduction in burglaries was greater in areas that were implementing faster, spending their money faster, and where they were prioritising environmental activities. Now, those make sense. You can make a logical argument for that. So the environmental improvements, for example, could be improved lighting in the neighbourhood, those kinds of things, so the reduction in burglaries was logical in that way. So what about the residents who were most actively involved? They were involved in these governing partnerships and in delivering the initiatives. And what we found there was an increase in the proportion of active residents who felt they had more control over decisions over time. That went up. That in all of these areas, the mental well-being improved for these active residents from the beginning of the programme up to 2018. There was no further increase by 2020, which we just assumed was the COVID impact, where we know mental health was damaged by COVID. And there were higher well-being scores for those residents who reported that they felt people were more involved socially and that people were influencing decisions. So this is a good news story. This experiment was having significant population level improvements in health and well-being and sense of control, which we know is good for health. And the residents who were very actively involved were getting a lot of benefits. But, and it's a really important but, what we found was across these 150 areas, better educated people and men were reporting more benefits than those with no educational qualifications or lower ones. And men were reporting more benefits than women. And that was supported by many of the qualitative stories that people told. There were many stories about negative social and health impacts for the residents who were most actively involved. So and it seems like it was the poorest of the poor that were getting less benefits, and women rather than men, of course, with women's double burden. So, you know, most evaluations of these health promotion initiatives don't look for negative impacts. And I think we need to think about how we evaluate if we, otherwise we're going to miss and therefore not be able to think about what we do to reduce these unintended negative consequences of local health promotion initiatives. So I want to end by just saying how I think the health promotion can be a driver for democratic renewal and greater equity. So a kind of justice sensitive health promotion, I suppose, and it does pick up on a number of the points that both Caroline and Ilona were making. So the first is that I think health promotion needs to move away from mapping and activating assets. They can do that at some point, but many of the communities of place that I work with have been asset mapped to death. They don't want any more asset mapping. They don't actually like the conversations about assets. It was important when it first started, when we were thinking about communities in a deficit way, but now we need to be thinking about power mapping. And I think both Ilona and Caroline mentioned this issue of power. I couldn't explain it to you, but when we looked at the findings from the communities in control study, what we were able to show was that it was power dynamics that were driving some of the positives and some of the negatives. Secondly, I think we need to think about the spaces that we create locally. This is a quote from a sociologist, Ifra Brave, that space is a social product. It's not simply there, a neutral container waiting to be filled. It's a dynamic, humanly constructed means of control and hence of power. And we need to be thinking about creating diverse participative spaces, spaces that allow people to release their power that they have and develop other forms of power, and to think about how they resist the power that is limiting their action. And then we need to take experiential knowledge much more seriously than we do. This is an image of the Grenfell Tower fire in London in 2017, which some of you may know about. Almost 100 people were killed. It's the most horrific fire. And for 10 years before the fire, the residents of that tower had been telling the local government and the Housing Management Authority, this did time, it's got a mind of its own, my slides here, about all of the problems that led to that fire, to the problems with the escape routes, to the problems with the cladding on the outside of the building, problems with the wiring inside, and they were ignored. Not only were they ignored, but the local authority sent them at one point a solicitor's letter telling them to stop criticizing them, otherwise they would be taking legal action against them. The fourth is to avoid what I refer to as lifestyle drift and to focus much more on the fundamental causes at a local level, but recognizing the limits of the local and making sure that we build connections between neighborhood action in different neighborhoods, within cities, across cities, nationally and internationally. But we do need to be talking about fundamental causes in these local health promotion. And finally, I think we need to embed advocacy in professional practice. It's too often seen as a politically sensitive thing to do amongst local health promotion officers, and they need support to be much more effective advocates and to see advocacy as an essential part of ethical professional practice, rather than as something that is for them, I suppose, at one level dangerous to do. So those would be my 5 points focus on power dynamics, curate diverse participative spaces that allow people to develop common interest, informal spaces, formal governance spaces, as Ilona was saying, the digital spaces as well as real spaces. Take experiential knowledge seriously. This is vital evidence for social action that we ignore at our peril. Avoid focusing on lifestyles and behaviors. Move upstream, focus on the fundamental causes, and we can then shift lifestyles and embed advocacy as a central element of professional practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Papai, and thank you to all of our speakers today. And I think we ended this webinar with a very hopeful but inspiring note that all of our health promotion efforts in the future should be justice sensitive. And thank you to all of the speakers on providing insight and food for thought on how to best do it. This is just a first of these events, and I hope we can continue with these discussions further. One of the avenues where we can continue to have this discussion is this email. So if any of you participants have any questions for our distinguished speakers, please feel free to send an email to this email address on this slide, and we will direct the questions to the relevant speakers, and at the end compile them and post them on our website so that all of you can see it. Thank you once again to everybody involved, all the participants today, and I hope you have a lovely day.